He left me while I was hooked to a chemo drip, barely able to keep my eyes open, my body trembling from the cocktail of poisons meant to save me. That's when I saw the message. Short, cold, and cruel. I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry. Goodbye. No explanation. No goodbye in person. Just a text from the man I'd planned to build a life with. The man who held my hand during my first diagnosis, who kissed my bald head and told me I was beautiful even when I didn't believe it myself. And now he was gone. Just like that. I stared at the screen, trying to blink away what I hoped was a hallucination brought on by the treatment. But the words were still there. My heart cracked, not just from the betrayal, but from the realization that I had to face the rest of this battle alone. Or so I thought. My name is Alyssa Hart. I was 32 when the doctors told me the cancer was back. I had beaten it once before, with Liam by my side every step of the way. We had been together for almost 6 years, engaged for 2. I thought he was my rock. I was wrong. At first, I thought maybe he was scared, overwhelmed. Maybe he'd come back after he cleared his head. But days turned into weeks, and I didn't hear a word. He blocked me on everything. I had to learn from a mutual friend that he had left town and moved back in with his parents. Apparently, he needed time to rediscover himself. And I was just collateral damage in that journey. I spent my days dragging myself to and from the hospital, fighting to stay alive, and nights crying into a pillow that still smelled like him. But slowly, something inside me shifted. Anger bloomed where the heartbreak once lived. Not the kind of anger that consumed you, but the kind that fueled you. The kind that said, I will rise from this. I started small. I would walk to the end of the driveway and back. Then around the block. My hair was gone, my body weak, but my spirit was growing fierce. With every small milestone, I felt the pieces of me that Liam tried to break reassembling into someone stronger. Someone better. The real twist, though, Liam came from a long line of wealthy entrepreneurs. His family owned a chain of boutique furniture stores, Hart and Haven. He had always scoffed at the idea of joining the family business, calling it boring and too traditional. But me? I used to help out at the local branch on weekends. I had an eye for design and a mind for business, and his father noticed. When I bumped into Mr. Hart at a local fundraiser months later, I almost turned away. But he walked right up to me, warm smile and all. I heard what happened, he said quietly, his voice sincere. And I'm sorry. Liam was raised better than that. I expected pity. Instead, I got something else. Opportunity. He offered me a position interior design consultant at first. Just part-time, something to ease me back into work after treatment. I accepted, mostly because I needed the distraction. What I didn't expect was how good I still was. Clients loved me. Sales went up. The store started feeling alive again. Mr. Hart noticed. Soon I was promoted. Then again. And again. It turned out the business was in trouble, declining revenue, outdated inventory, and a brand that hadn't evolved in a decade. I poured my energy into transforming it. We launched a modern line, revamped the website, started a social media campaign. I worked long hours, often forgetting I was still healing. But the fire inside me was burning too bright to stop now. 2 years after the day Liam left me on that hospital bed, I was sitting in the boardroom of Hart and Haven's headquarters. Mr. Hart, now semi-retired, slid a folder across the table. Inside was a contract. Ownership. My name on the papers. I blinked at him in disbelief. You earned it, he said. This company needs someone who cares. Someone with vision. And you've given us both. I walked out of that meeting as the new majority owner of Hart and Haven. And Liam? Oh, he tried to come back. Of course he did. He showed up at a product launch party, disheveled, eyes wide, clearly shocked. I saw him standing near the back, watching me speak to investors with confidence he had never believed I had. He looked like he had something to say, but I never gave him the chance. I turned and walked away, leaving him exactly where he left me, behind. Today, Heart and Haven is thriving. We've opened 3 new locations and expanded our design line to include eco-friendly furniture. I speak at cancer awareness events, not just as a survivor, but as someone who found purpose through pain. I look back and realize Liam's betrayal was my turning point. He thought he was walking away from a burden. But really, he freed me to become something extraordinary. He left me during chemo. Now, I own everything he took for granted, including his family's legacy. And I'm just getting started. Alyssa Hart had always been the kind of woman who carried herself with quiet strength. Not the kind that shouted or demanded attention, but the kind that people noticed when she walked into a room. There was a softness in her smile, the kind of warmth that made you feel like you belonged, like maybe the world wasn't such a bad place after all. That was the Alyssa most people knew. But behind that gentle confidence was a woman who had learned to survive the hard way. She grew up in a modest home in Portland, Oregon. Her mother, a schoolteacher, taught her the value of kindness. Her father, a carpenter, showed her how to build things from nothing, both with her hands and her heart. Her dream had always been simple. Open a small home decor boutique, settle down with someone who made her laugh, and fill her life with beautiful things. She wasn't chasing grandeur, just peace. That dream seemed to come to life the day she met Liam Hart. Liam was magnetic, the kind of man who could walk into a party and draw every eye without even trying. He was charming, articulate, confident to the point of arrogance. But in the early days, Alyssa mistook that for ambition. He came from old Portland money, the kind that whispered instead of bragged. His parents owned Heart and Haven, a legacy brand of high-end furniture stores that had served the region for over 3 generations. But Liam had no interest in the family business. He was always chasing the next big thing, startups, crypto, even a short-lived podcast where he interviewed other visionaries like himself. None of it stuck. He bounced from one shiny opportunity to the next, leaving a trail of half-finished ideas and unpaid invoices. But he was captivating. He made Alyssa feel seen. He said all the right things, held her hand in public, brought her flowers on Tuesdays just because. When Alyssa was first diagnosed with lymphoma at age 28, Liam had been by her side. He held her hair back during the nausea, sat with her through long, silent chemo sessions, and whispered that they would beat this together. She believed him. When she lost her hair, he told her she was still the most beautiful woman in the world. When she cried herself to sleep, he stayed awake and held her. So when she went into remission a year later, it felt like they had earned something sacred. They got engaged in a little garden behind her favorite cafe. It wasn't extravagant, just intimate and real. At that moment, she thought, this is the man I will grow old with. But people don't always stay who they were in the beginning. Sometimes they grow, and sometimes they run. The second diagnosis came 2 years later. It was during a routine scan, and Alyssa had gone alone, expecting nothing. When the doctor entered the room with that look, the one she knew too well, her stomach dropped. The cancer was back. She told Liam that night. They had just finished dinner, and he was scrolling through his phone. She reached across the table, took his hand, and whispered, "It's back." He didn't speak right away, just stared at her, then said, "Are you sure?" She nodded. He squeezed her hand but didn't say the words she needed. "No, we'll get through this. No, I'm not going anywhere." Just silence and a faraway look in his eyes. That was the first time Alyssa noticed the crack, the way his grip loosened, the way he looked more trapped than supportive. In the weeks that followed, his presence thinned like smoke. He still came to appointments, but his phone was always buzzing. He still stayed over, but the warmth in his eyes had cooled. She chalked it up to stress, told herself he was just overwhelmed. But her gut told her otherwise. Then came the text. It was a Thursday afternoon. She was halfway through her 3rd chemo session, her body aching, her veins stinging from the drip. Her phone buzzed on the tray beside her. She glanced over, expecting a sweet message, maybe a meme to make her smile. Instead, she saw, asterisk, I can't do this anymore.
I'm sorry. Goodbye.
Asterisk. No signature. No explanation. Nothing. Her breath caught. Her heart pounded louder than the monitor beside her. She tried calling, straight to voicemail. Texted, no response. Tried again and again until finally the messages stopped going through altogether.
Blocked.
She sat there, surrounded by the beeping of machines and the sterile smell of antiseptic, and felt the world tilt beneath her. A nurse gently asked if she was okay. Alyssa nodded, though her vision blurred. Because what else could she say? For a week, she barely moved. Her mother flew in from Bend and tried to help. Cooked, cleaned, held her daughter as she wept. But nothing seemed to cut through the fog. The betrayal ran deeper than heartbreak. Liam hadn't just left her. He'd abandoned her at her lowest, her most vulnerable. He hadn't even had the decency to say it to her face. But while Alyssa drowned in her grief, Liam was already rewriting his story. To his friends and family, he spun a softer version. That it had been mutual. That he was still healing from the stress of watching her suffer the first time. That he just couldn't do it again. Some nodded in sympathy. Others raised eyebrows. But the Hart family? They were furious. His father, Edward Hart, was a traditional man. Stoic, sharp, and deeply rooted in legacy. He believed in duty, in standing by your word, even when it was hard. So when he learned what Liam had done, he didn't just feel disappointment. He felt shame. Edward had always respected Alyssa. She was the kind of woman he had hoped his son would marry, grounded, capable, sincere. He had watched her bring new ideas to the store during holiday rushes, had listened as she discussed color palettes and customer experiences over wine at family dinners. She was the real deal. And now, she had been discarded like a burden. The next time Edward saw her was at a local charity gala, an event for cancer awareness, ironically. Alyssa, still thin from treatment, wore a simple black dress and a wig that didn't quite fit. But her eyes burned with quiet strength. They spoke for a long time mostly about nothing. Until Edward said almost offhand, "We could use someone like you at Hart and Haven." Alyssa hesitated. It felt too soon. Too raw. But something about the offer stirred her. Maybe it was the idea of reclaiming a piece of her dignity. Maybe it was the chance to pour herself into something that wasn't just about survival but about growth.
So she said yes.
At first, the position was small. A few hours a week, helping with display design and customer engagement. But Alyssa was good. Exceptionally good. Her instincts were sharp, her taste timeless but fresh. She understood what people wanted, not just in furniture but in experience. She introduced weekend design workshops, suggested collaborations with local artisans, updated the layout of the showroom to feel more like a home and less like a catalog. Slowly, the numbers improved. Clients returned. Word of mouth spread. Sales grew. Liam, meanwhile, watched from afar. His latest startup had failed, again. He'd burned through most of his trust fund trying to fund it. And when the whispers reached him that Alyssa was now working with his father, that she was thriving, something in him snapped. He told himself she was manipulating them, playing the victim, using her illness to gain sympathy. But deep down, he knew the truth. He had left a woman who would have built an empire beside him. And now, she was building one without him. Alyssa didn't gloat. She didn't mention him at work, didn't bring up the past to anyone. But the way she carried herself said it all. Asterisk, I'm not broken. I'm not done. And I don't need you to rise. Asterisk. Still, the past has a way of circling back. And as Hart and Haven entered its biggest expansion yet, Alyssa would soon face a choice. Not just about business, but about what kind of woman she wanted to be. Because Liam wasn't done with her. Not yet. And the revenge Alyssa never asked for, was already unfolding. In the days after Liam's abrupt disappearance, Alyssa found herself buried under more than just the physical weight of chemotherapy. The emotional toll was heavier. Her phone buzzed constantly, not from Liam, of course, but from friends, acquaintances, even distant relatives who had heard the story and didn't know what to say. Some offered sympathy, others stumbled through awkward silence. A few even suggested she try to understand what Liam must have been going through, that maybe he needed space to cope. That made her laugh, bitterly, quietly. The whispers started not long after. In their social circles, it became a kind of unspoken scandal.
People took sides.
Some believed Alyssa was playing the victim, milking the situation. Others were appalled by Liam's actions, especially in a community that had always upheld family loyalty and honor. A small local blog picked up the story, vaguely referencing a wealthy entrepreneur's son abandoning his fiancée during her cancer battle. The story gained traction. Reddit threads emerged. It hit a nerve with people, particularly women who had been left in the trenches of illness, grief, or hardship by those who once swore to love them. The narrative took on a life of its own. At Heart and Haven, things were quieter, but not without tension. Alyssa had tried to keep a low profile, but Edward Hart's sudden endorsement of her didn't go unnoticed. Employees murmured about her rapid rise, some jealous, others inspired. But Alyssa didn't feed the fire. She came in early, stayed late, and let her work speak. Still, the weight of being the woman Liam had left never fully disappeared. It clung to her like the last wisps of chemo-induced nausea, lingering unpleasant, but eventually fading. For Liam, the fallout hit harder than expected. He hadn't anticipated the story going public. He didn't think people would care that much. But the internet was cruel and swift. Anonymous comments ripped him apart, called him heartless, a coward, a privileged parasite. Clients pulled out of his startup venture. A podcast interview he had recorded weeks prior was pulled by the host, who made a public statement condemning his abandonment of moral responsibility. Even his inner circle began to shift. Friends distanced themselves. Old mentors stopped answering his calls. And when his own mother, usually soft-spoken and diplomatic, told him at dinner one evening, "I don't recognize you anymore," something inside him cracked. But rather than take accountability, Liam spiraled. He told himself Alyssa had manipulated everything, that she played the sympathy card, used her pain to build a platform. He began stalking her success quietly, watching Heart and Haven's online campaigns, reading press releases, even attending one of the design workshops she hosted under a fake name, lurking in the back corner in a hoodie and cap. She didn't notice him. Or maybe she did and didn't care. That stung the most. Back at Heart and Haven, Alyssa found herself becoming a kind of reluctant symbol of resilience, of quiet revenge. But she didn't feel strong. Not really. At night, she still cried sometimes. Her body bore scars from the cancer and the treatment, and her soul bore scars from Liam. She missed the version of him who sat by her hospital bed the first time, who brought her books and silly socks and hummed when she was too tired to speak. That Liam was gone, and in his place stood a man who had traded courage for cowardice. Still, she had no time to mourn what could have been. The business was booming, and with growth came pressure. She had to manage inventory, staff expectations, investor meetings. Every time she succeeded, someone suggested she was lucky. Every time she stumbled, someone whispered she was in over her head. But she kept showing up, kept rebuilding herself, brick by emotional brick. One moment stood out. It was a small thing, but it changed everything. She was visiting the children's cancer wing at the hospital where she had been treated. It was part of a campaign. Heart and Haven was donating custom furniture to create warm, comforting spaces for kids in treatment. She met a little girl named Clara, who had the same bald head and nervous smile Alyssa once wore. The girl looked up at her and said, "Are you the furniture lady with cancer?" Alyssa smiled and knelt beside her. I was the lady with cancer. Now I'm the lady who builds things. Clara grinned. Can you build me a bed with clouds on it? I can build you a bed with clouds, stars, and a unicorn, Alyssa said, her eyes misting. Anything you want. That moment, just a few words from a child, cut through all the noise. All the whispers, the rumors, the loneliness. She remembered who she was. Not Liam's ex-fiancée. Not the woman who was left. She was a builder. Of beds. Of dreams. Of her own damn life. The internal conflict didn't vanish overnight. There were days she still doubted herself. Nights she'd scroll through old photos and feel the sting of betrayal all over again. But each time, she came back stronger, wiser, more whole. Liam, on the other hand, kept sinking. He applied for jobs no one bit. His name had become toxic. The heart name was still respected, but he no longer carried its weight. His father had made that clear. And every time he tried to move on, someone brought up Alyssa's story. In interviews, at bars, even on dates. Eventually, he stopped trying to rebuild. Instead, he fixated on her. Told himself he would confront her.
Clear the air.
Maybe even charm his way back in. But Alyssa didn't need closure. She'd already built something better. And the world was starting to notice. Alyssa's turning point wasn't marked by fireworks or a grand speech. It happened, as most transformations do, quietly, on a cold January morning, alone in her apartment, sitting on the floor surrounded by fabric samples and half-sketched blueprints. She had just finished another round of medication, not chemo this time, but the long tail of maintenance treatment meant to keep the cancer from returning. The nausea lingered less now. Her strength was returning. Her hair, though still short, was coming back in gentle waves. But her soul, that was where the biggest change had taken root. She stared at her sketchbook, flipping through pages of furniture concepts that she had drawn during recovery. Sofas with soft curves and modular storage. Coffee tables with embedded memory drawers, places to store old photos, notes, pieces of one's past. Designs inspired by her own journey. Comfort meeting functionality. Beauty meeting survival. Until now, she had kept those sketches to herself. She didn't think anyone would understand them, much less want them. But something inside her stirred, a boldness that had been buried beneath fear for too long. She picked up the phone and called Edward Hart. I have an idea, she said, voice clear. That phone call changed everything. By March, Hart and Haven announced the launch of a new line, the Revival Collection, a series of home pieces designed not just for aesthetics, but for healing. Memory-infused furniture, adjustable pieces for people with mobility challenges, reading chairs designed for long, quiet moments of stillness. It wasn't just furniture, it was a story. Her story. And the public responded. Orders skyrocketed. The line sold out in less than a month. Major interior design blogs covered it. Magazines requested interviews. People weren't just buying furniture, they were buying Alyssa's triumph. And for the first time in her life, Alyssa stood in the spotlight and didn't flinch. She welcomed it. Not for the fame, not for the applause, but because she had turned her pain into purpose. But success wasn't the only thing catching attention. Liam was watching. From the shadows of social media and business forums, he tracked her every move. At first, he dismissed her new designs as gimmicky. But when industry leaders started praising her vision and awards started pouring in, something inside him cracked. He tried to rationalize it. Told himself he had laid the foundation. That if she hadn't met him, she never would have gotten into the business world in the first place. But the truth was too loud to ignore. Alyssa had surpassed him. Without shortcuts. Without favors. She had done it the hard way, and she had won. The contrast was stark. While Alyssa was building boardroom partnerships, expanding Heart and Haven into 3 new cities, and collaborating with cancer support foundations, Liam was drinking too much, sleeping too little, and wondering where everything had gone wrong. And then, as if the universe wanted to drive the final nail in, an invitation arrived. Heart and Haven was throwing its first Legacy Gala, a celebration of its renewal, expansion, and the new leadership under Alyssa. The guest list included major designers, media outlets, influencers, and, as a courtesy, the entire Heart family, including Liam. Edward had considered not inviting him, but in the end he did. Not as an olive branch, but as a lesson. Alyssa didn't know he was coming. She had spent weeks preparing for this event, carefully selecting the theme, the venue, even the wine list. Every detail reflected her journey. The gallery walls displayed design sketches alongside quotes from cancer survivors. A quiet jazz trio played in the background. Soft lighting danced over the Revival collection on display in the center of the room. When she stepped onto the stage that night, dressed in a deep emerald gown that hugged her newly healthy frame, the room fell silent. She spoke not of her own pain, but of what it had taught her. About resilience. About redesigning not just homes, but lives. This collection, she said, her voice steady, was born out of the darkest chapter of my life. But what I learned is that sometimes healing creates space for something even more beautiful. Not despite the pain, but because of it. The applause was thunderous. And then she saw him. Liam stood in the back, half-shadowed, hands in his pockets, face unreadable. After the speech, he approached her. She turned before he could speak. "Congratulations," he said. "The event, it's impressive." Alyssa met his gaze evenly. "Thank you." "I wanted to," he began, but she held up a hand. "You don't have to explain," she said softly. "I already forgave you. A long time ago." He blinked. "You did?"
Yes.
"But forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting. Or inviting someone back in." Liam's eyes dropped. "I was scared, Alyssa. That day I left, I felt helpless. Like I was drowning." "I was drowning," she said, not cruelly, just plainly. "And you left me in the water." He nodded slowly, the weight of it finally settling in. "You were the strongest person I knew," he said. "I didn't think I could carry any of it." "You didn't have to," she replied. "You just had to stay." There was silence between them. Heavy. Final. Liam looked around the room. The applause still echoed faintly. "You built all this." "I rebuilt all this," she said, correcting him gently. From the rubble. He didn't argue. What could he say? Before he turned to leave, he said, "I hope you know I was proud of you, even when I didn't say it." She gave him a nod. "I don't need you to be proud of me anymore." And just like that, Liam Hart, the man who once held her hand through the storm and later walked away when the clouds returned, walked out of her life for good. Alyssa turned back to the crowd. A designer approached, asking about a possible collaboration. An editor from Architectural Digest asked for a feature. The night rolled on in a shimmer of laughter, clinking glasses, and stories shared in warm corners. But the most pivotal moment had already passed. Not when Liam arrived. Not even when he left. It was the moment Alyssa realized she didn't need revenge. She didn't need validation. She had herself. And that was more than enough to build an empire. The Legacy Gala had been a dream, a full-circle moment where Alyssa Hart stood beneath soft gold lights, not as a patient or a victim, but as the woman who'd taken her pain and turned it into power. But while the applause faded and the guests began to leave with glowing reviews and signed order forms, something deeper stirred beneath the surface, something unfinished. Later that night, long after the last flute of champagne had been cleared away, Alyssa walked alone through the Heart and Haven flagship showroom. It was quiet now. The Revival collection stood still under warm spotlights, like monuments of survival. She ran her fingers across the edge of a reclaimed wood desk, a design she created during her final month of treatment. The drawers were lined with velvet, each one inscribed with a word of encouragement: endure, rebuild, rise. Behind her, she heard the sound of approaching footsteps. Didn't expect to find you here, Edward Hart's voice said gently. She smiled without turning. Didn't expect to still be here either. He stepped beside her, hands behind his back, observing her creation like a proud curator. You've made something remarkable, Alyssa. I mean that. You took a risk on me when no one else would, she said softly. I won't forget that. Edward nodded. Then, after a long silence, he added, Liam's gone back to San Diego. Alyssa didn't react. She had anticipated as much. He told me he needed to get away. Start over, Edward continued. Said, he doesn't expect forgiveness anymore. She let the silence stretch before finally answering. Good. Because he already got more than he deserved. Edward turned to her, not as a business partner now, but as a father. I don't know where I went wrong with him, he admitted, voice heavy with regret. I tried to raise a man of character. But maybe I made it too easy for him to run from consequences. You didn't fail, Alyssa said, placing a hand on his arm. We all make choices. Liam made his. But you, he said, looking her in the eyes now. You made something out of those choices. You took the ugliest chapter of your life and made it into art, into leadership, into legacy. Alyssa's throat tightened. I just didn't want to disappear, she said. After everything, I didn't want my story to end in that hospital bed. It didn't, Edward said firmly. And, because of that, neither will mine. A few days later, that promise would come into focus when a boardroom vote shook the very foundation of Hart and Haven. The company had reached a crucial crossroads. Investors had been pressuring Edward to sell a significant stake to a larger, more modern retail conglomerate looking to absorb boutique brands. It was a tempting offer. Millions in instant capital, full national reach, and guaranteed infrastructure support. But it also meant giving up control, giving up the soul of what they had built. Alyssa was torn. Expansion meant impact. More awareness, more reach for her revival line, more furniture in hospitals and homes that needed comfort. But a sale could compromise the brand's vision, turn her story into a product instead of a promise. The final vote came down to the company's executive board, 7 votes total. Edward, technically retired but still holding a voting share, remained neutral until the very end. Tension filled the room as votes were cast, 3 in favor of the acquisition, 3 against. It came down to Edward. All eyes turned to him. He looked across the table, then across the room, to Alyssa, seated quietly, hands folded in her lap. She didn't plead with her eyes.
She didn't beg.
She simply waited. I spent most of my life building something I could pass on, Edward began, his voice steady. I always assumed it would be to my son. But legacies aren't inherited. They're earned. He turned and looked at Alyssa. My vote is no. And I will be transferring majority ownership to Alyssa Hart, effective immediately. There was a gasp.
Shock.
One executive pushed back, demanding to know how emotion could outweigh strategy. But Edward's voice remained calm. Strategy without soul is bankruptcy. Hart and Haven was never about just furniture. It's about story. And no one tells a story like Alyssa. The meeting adjourned in chaos. But the outcome was clear. Alyssa now officially held the reins of the empire she had helped resurrect. She was no longer the outsider, no longer the abandoned woman in a chemo chair. She was now CEO. That evening, as she stood on the rooftop of the building that housed the very first Hart and Haven showroom, a quiet breeze danced through her short curls. She looked over the city, a city that had once witnessed her fall, and let the realization sink in. She had won, not out of vengeance, but out of purpose. Her phone buzzed. A message from Clara's mother, the little girl from the hospital. Clara's bed arrived today. She said it feels like sleeping on hope. Thank you. Alyssa smiled, her heart full. And then, unexpectedly, a second message. It was from Liam. Just 3 words. I'm truly sorry. She stared at it for a long while, then deleted it. There was nothing more to say. Months passed. Heart and Haven opened its first out-of-state location, complete with a gallery showcasing Alyssa's designs and a small wing dedicated to cancer recovery centers. Her Revival collection now supported a foundation she'd started, one that offered design makeovers to survivors rebuilding their lives post-treatment. During a foundation dinner, she was introduced to a quiet, soft-spoken architect named Daniel. He was kind, a little awkward, and refreshingly uninterested in her media presence. They talked all night about art, architecture, and memory. It wasn't love at first sight. It was something gentler. A new beginning. One evening, as she closed her laptop and stood up from her desk at the office, her eyes landed on a small plaque mounted beside the doorway. A quote she had chosen months ago when she first moved in. Out of broken pieces, something whole can still be built. Alyssa's heart had been shattered by illness, by betrayal, by loss. But piece by piece, she rebuilt herself. And what she created wasn't just a business or a brand. It was a beacon. For everyone who had been left. For everyone who had suffered in silence. For everyone who needed proof that the worst thing that ever happened to you can also be the beginning of the best version of yourself. And that was the story she was meant to live.